With me for tonight's Big Picture Rumble are Patrick Hedger, Policy Director for American Encore, Christy Setzer, Progressive Strategist and President and CEO of New Heights Communications, and Huey Newsom, member of MoveOnUp.org and founder of The Objective Citizen. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
The Objective Citizen, Huey.
Yeah,
what is that?
It's a new blog site. It's pretty exciting.
Really?
Yeah.
What's the web? What's the website?
TheObjectiveCitizen.com.
.com. The Objective Citizen.
TheObjectiveCitizen.com.
Okay, I know what I'm going to do when I get home. I'll check that out. I'm looking forward to it.
Good to me.
Okay, so the kids' table debate is just about over. Let's check out a few of the highlights here. Here's Senator Lindsey Graham's opening statement.
One, thanks CNN for having people at this debate. I'm Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, in case you can't tell. I want to thank Ms. Reagan for inviting me. It means the world to me. I'm the only candidate tonight who served in the military while Ronald Reagan was our president and our commander-in-chief. It's one of the highlights of my life. I'm running for president to destroy radical Islam, to win the war on terror, to protect you and your family. And in that quest, I have an uncompromising determination to win this war, just like President Reagan had an uncompromising determination to destroy the evil empire and win the Cold War. Above all others, on both sides of the aisle, I am most qualified to be Commander-in-Chief on day one. 33 years in the Air Force, 35 trips to Iraq and Afghanistan. I understand this war. I have a plan to win it, and I intend to win it.
Well, it's interesting. I'd love to get all your thoughts on this. But first of all, Reagan sold weapons illegally to Iran for 6 years. Reagan, when Al-Qaeda, I think it was Al-Qaeda, maybe it was Hezbollah, blew up in Lebanon, killed 283 U.S. soldiers. Reagan just turned and ran. So much for that war. And Lindsey Graham, a little later on, he goes on to say, you know, if I'm elected president, the first thing I'm going to do is move 10,000 troops instantly into Iraq and even more into Syria. Is anybody going to vote for this stuff? Does this make any sense to anybody?
No, I'm not. I don't think so, and I'm not sure anybody's really thinking about it. I mean, Lindsey Graham is registering at an asterisk in the polling right now, and it's because I think a lot of conservatives and Republican voters especially feel kind of betrayed by what happened during the Bush presidency as far as foreign policy, and certainly now are very disappointed in the Obama administration's foreign policy. I think we need to have a strong military and a strong presence on the globe, but that doesn't mean poking the hornet's nest. Mm-hmm. I do think we have a bit of a responsibility to stand up to ISIS, but we also have a responsibility to take a leadership role in such a way that we get Arab partners really committing to this, because this is a mess in their backyard.
As Bernie Sanders points out at every opportunity, the third largest military in the world is in Saudi Arabia.
Right, yeah, and they've got
US
kind of
weapons
in the region. Yeah, and they've got just as good of weapons as we do. We sell them all the weapons.
Yeah, there you go. Christy.
Yeah, it was sort of an interesting strategy there. You could see, well, strategy number one, of course, was to raise the specter of Ronald Reagan within the first 5 seconds, and then again about 10 seconds later. So that was out there strong. And the second strategy obviously seemed to be, I'm strong, right? Which is a position that he's trying to obviously get himself aligned with Donald Trump and sounding strong. And how do you do that? By sounding pro-war. The problem, of course, as Patrick alluded to, is that we're at a bit more of an isolationist point right now, I think, at least in the Republican Party, that would really be open to those sorts of policies. So hard to know.
Yeah, Huey, Lindsey Graham is probably the most soft-spoken guy up there. Ben Carson's probably the most soft-spoken guy, but Lindsey Graham is certainly number two. And it was interesting that he was the shortest on the list. And there's actually been some scholarship in presidential races. Something like 90% of the time, the tallest person wins. Really, yeah. No, I'm serious. It's like if you look literally over the last 100 years, and is Lindsey Graham compensating, or is he? Is he trying to be a tough guy when actually he's kind of a soft-spoken JAG officer? He talks about, I was in the military. Well, yeah, he sat behind a desk. He was a lawyer.
I think he's making a bet, one last pitch bet, that this is going to be something that he can own and it will resonate with the American people, because nobody else is taking this strong of a stance, considering almost their entire campaign around fighting the war on terrorism. Other people, immigration is an issue, the economy is an issue. But for Lindsey Graham, this is it. This is the where he's hanging his hat. So
this is his do or die moment.
This is do or die.
And so he's just like Scott Walker's going full in on the unions.
Yes.
Lindsey Graham's going full in on ISIS. Here's Governor Bobby Jindal's thoughts on that socialist Bernie Sanders and on Donald Trump.
They've got a socialist that is gaining on Hillary Clinton. Folks, you can't make that up. A socialist is doing well in the Democratic primary. The best way for us to give this election back would be to nominate a Donald Trump. He'll either implode in the general election, or if, God forbid, if he were in the White House, we have no idea what he would do. You can't just attack him on policy. He doesn't care about policy. It's not enough to say he was for socialized medicine or higher taxes.
Thank you, Governor.
He's not serious.
In other words, the guy who's got 30% of our party's vote, who's the #1 guy in our race, is nuts. Or something like that, Huey?
He does have an interesting point where Donald Trump has taken a lot of very liberal positions, and it is kind of confounding how a single payer system is far to the left of Obamacare. It's to the left of the public option, but yet I still have yet to hear Donald Trump go back on his stance that single payer could work.
Yeah.
And it's a question of are we having an ideological
But that might just be
discussion?
reality-based speech. I mean, single payer is the most efficient way to deliver health care. It's been demonstrated by every developed country in the world.
Without getting into a debate on which is the best system, we can at least agree that it is kind of ironic that the party and the movement that fought so hard to abolish Obamacare has now turned around and has made their leader, so to speak, for lack of a better term, someone that is far to the left.
Like single payer, he wants to raise taxes on hedge fund billionaires and what was the other? 35% import tariffs.
That's right.
On foreign manufactured goods. It's actually, I would sign up for all three of those things.
Yeah, I mean, he has actually taken some interesting positions, which I'm sure we'll get to, but Bobby Jindal's actually right, which is that the most hardcore Donald Trump supporters really don't actually care about his policy. They're attracted to his tone, which sounds strong. And so there's almost nothing, and this is the, Frank Luntz was horrified that he did this focus group, and basically found out that there was almost nothing that you could tell a Donald Trump supporter that would make them go off their hardcore support for Donald Trump. Didn't matter if you read them horrible things that he'd said about women or about people of color or whatever. Even like sort of economic things, like bad deals he'd made. There was almost no argument that you could make would actually shake that support.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to explain the Trump phenomenon beyond that we've had such a vacuum of leadership over the last few years that people are just willing to, the pendulum's been pulled so far towards the United States in general.
You're blaming Trump on Obama?
Oh, well, certainly, yeah. I mean, he's part of the equation, really. I mean, how do you not blame the front runner in this presidential election or any presidential election on the presidency of the previous president or the incumbent president?
I think the Republican Party is responsible for the Republican Party.
Well, no. I mean, if you look at the voters, he's attracting a lot of Democratic support, too. You just said it yourself. I mean, you like a lot of the things that he's saying.
No, I didn't say I'd vote for Donald Trump. I said I would take those three positions he's taken.
Well, and a lot of it, I think, too, is that we have a lot of complicated economic policy that has been taken and broken down into tiny sound bites, and people don't understand that a 35% tariff would absolutely cripple the economy, and it has done that before, because they think, oh, well, yeah, why aren't we building cars in the United States? And they don't think through some of the complicated economics behind trade and comparative advantage. I mean, these are things that we're taking at a college level that should be being taught at a middle school or high school level.
Well, if we're going to talk comparative advantage, we should be talking VAT taxes. But now we're starting to get into the weeds on a whole other area. Here's Governor, which would be the equivalent of, I mean, that would be the smart way of doing what Trump was talking about.
Right.
Just join the rest of the world and have a VAT tax. Here's Governor George, but taxes, Republicans? Here's Governor George Pataki's opening statement.
Hi, I'm George Pataki, and I am honored to be here this afternoon with all of you at the Reagan Library. When I think of Ronald Reagan, I think of his tremendous smile, a smile that reflected his optimism and his unending belief and faith in America and in Americans. And it was that belief in America that led to a great presidency, a presidency that led to decades of safety, security, and prosperity for America. That's exactly the type of leadership we need in Washington today. And that's why I'm running for President of the United States. Thank you.
You know, I think Pataki actually said something semi-profound there, and that is, if I can paraphrase it completely, is that Americans want America to be great. Americans want America to be a positive, optimistic, forward-looking, you know, it was Jack Kennedy's New Frontiers. It was Ronald Reagan's, you know, A New Day in America. And having a guy with orange hair yelling, you know, we're a bunch of idiots and everything's falling apart, probably isn't the way to win elections. And I think that was the subtext to what Pataki was saying. You look like you want to.
The interesting thing, of course, is that the person that said that is, you know, in the 1% range, where the person that is yelling idiots is in 30% range. Well, the one thing about the Trump phenomenon is so many things about traditional politics in the United States have been turned on their heads. And the troubling thing is that, you know, I think Pataki's right. I think that's something that will resonate in the general. The question is, can we get to the general with someone that's reasonable, that can win a general election?
I actually disagree a little bit. I think that part of the reason for Ben Carson's rising in the polls is because there is, you know, a big part of the electorate that actually does want a softer spoken, again, you know, a difference in tone. And again, I don't think either with Trump or with Ben Carson, they're being evaluated on their policy positions because they haven't ever held elected office. You know, there just aren't that many things in their record to look at. But I agree with what Pataki was saying, which is that there has to be an optimism if you're going to be successful in the Republican Party, because so many of the positions that the Republicans take seem so inherently cold-hearted. If you're talking about cutting food stamps for poor people, that sounds pretty awful and pretty terrible. There's got to be some reason, some sunny reason you're giving us as to why we should swallow that.
While you do it. Patrick?
Well, yeah, I think
smile while you cut food stamps and throw grandma off the cliff?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Pastimes, really. No, I think Pataki definitely touched on, as much as I think Pataki's kind of an irrelevant force here, I think he touched on some of the reason why a lot of liberals they'll bring up points like, oh, well, Reagan might have raised taxes, or Reagan compromised, blah, blah, blah. Why do Republicans these days like him? It's because Reagan really did kind of have this tone that was very positive about the outlook. It's morning in America. I mean, talk about one ad that probably won an election.
Yeah. He was the Republican Jack Kennedy,
right?
In that regard.
And I think that contrasts nicely with, you know, either, oh, our leaders are stupid, or you didn't build that, or any of the rhetoric we've seen lately.
Yeah, amazing. More of tonight's Big Picture Rumble right after the break.
I'm Jesse Ventura, and I bring you the truth, loud and clear. I was a Navy frogman, a professional wrestler, and the governor of Minnesota. Now I'm taking you off the grid. Join me every Friday for Off the Grid on RT. Question more and stay vigilant.
I'm Tom Hartman, and you're watching RT America. The United States is now officially an oligarchy. What happens if this guy becomes president? He has completely succeeded in falling down Alice's rabbit hole and flipping reality upside down. Question more.
I want you to look at what is going on in downtown America.
Many couldn't help but think that it was a military force, not a police force.
Tanks, combat gear, assault rifles.
Today's breed of American law enforcement is dressed in riot gear.
Is the U.S. now in a war against its own people?
We're being militarized.
Police forces are arming their law enforcement agents with weapons of war.
What politicians do is something we don't do. They put themselves on the line, and they get accepted or rejected. So when you want to be president, why would you want to be? Why would someone want to be president? What's it like to be president? What's it like when the phone rings at 3 in the morning? Can't be a good call. I'm interested always in the whys and the hows.
And Q Larry.
Question more.
Welcome back to tonight's Big Picture Rumble. Still with me, Patrick Hedger, Christy Setzer, and Huey Newsom. Once again, great to have you all with us. Jeb Bush has tried to pass off his tax plan as populist. But it's really just like pretty much every other Republican tax plan. It's a giveaway to the rich. As a new report from Citizens for Tax Justice has pointed out, while Jeb's plan would cut personal income taxes by $227 billion a year, and of course cut government revenue by that much too, more than half of that, 53% of those cuts, would benefit the richest 1% of Americans. So, you know, Jeb says if we cut taxes on the richest 1% by 53%, we will somehow magically go to 4% growth of GDP. And yet, if you look at the history of the United States, the times when the top tax rates were above, were above 50% were the times that we had the greatest growth of GDP. And the times when we had the lowest tax rates, yeah, it's in the queue behind us, actually. We're going to see it, too. When we had the lowest tax rates, that's when we had the worst growth of GDP. In fact, we've only been above or even near 4% when the top tax rate was between 75 and 90%. So shouldn't, if Jeb wants to have 4% GDP growth, shouldn't he be proposing rolling back the Reagan tax cuts?
I don't think so, because this graph doesn't show how many people were paying those taxes.
Right.
I mean, you have a lot more people paying at the lower rates, and when you have taxes at 90%, people start to shelter their money. I mean, that's just a historical fact. The Mellon tax cuts.
Nobody pays 90%.
Right, exactly. So what's the point of having the rate up that high?
But, let me rephrase that. 99.999% of Americans, when the top tax rate was 90%, we're not paying 90%.
And neither were the top 1%. They shield all their money in municipal bonds and other tax havens. I mean, you're never going to get the rich person to pay at 90%. They'll keep their money out of play. But if you lower the tax rate, what we're saying is that you get that money in play. You can actually tax it at 30% instead of having an imaginary tax at 90%.
That's a nonsensical argument.
No, that's what the facts are.
No, it's not.
The Mellon tax cuts. I mean, the history pans that out. And without getting into too many numbers, just think about basic human instinct.
Fine.
If you're going to be hit with a 90% rate, why would you want to why would you shelter
your point is that people are going to try to get around the rules if tax rates are at 90%. But here's the reality, as you know very well. They try to get around the rules whether the rates are 90% or 30% or 25%. That's why Apple and big corporations like that pay effectively 0% in corporate taxes.
Well, we have the highest corporate tax in the world, so I think that's a bad example.
Which gets small businesses.
Yes, we have the highest tax rate. That's a different thing than taxes.
Right. And so,
pardon me, Christy. We're both interrupting you.
Yeah, no. It's fine. The point, though, of course, is that that's a tremendously dumb argument because people are always going to try to get around it. That is by the nature. We need to crack down on it.
But when you make it more expensive for them to not get around it, then they're going to try harder.
So let's get back to why Jeb Bush is doing this. Jeb Bush is doing it because it benefits Jeb Bush, obviously, and it benefits people like him. There's no other reason other than it is, purely of self-interested reasons. He does not actually believe that we're going to
Jeb
hit
Bush
better
is running
growth.
for president to cut his own personal tax rate. The rich always do fine.
I'm not saying that's why he's running for president. I'm saying
I think
why
he's speaking to the donor class. What we're seeing is, with the exception of Donald Trump and maybe Ben Carson, by and large, the Republicans are speaking to the donor class, not to the voters. And by the way, the reality is that when the top tax rate was 90%, CEOs were only taking 30 times what their workers were taking. What were they doing with the rest of that money? They were reinvesting in their company. They were inventing new products. They were growing markets. They were doing marketing campaigns and advertising campaigns. I was there back then in the 70s. I remember those tax rates. I remember when my CPA came to me and said, you're paying more than 40% in income taxes right now. You need to stop taking a salary out of this company and start putting money back into this company. And I did. And we grew this company from 6 employees to 18 employees. And this was all before Reagan.
But wait a minute. Today, CEOs get paid in, stock options and shares of the company. So I don't know if I necessarily agree that that's not happening.
That happened in the 80s, too. That was a rule change that Reagan oversaw.
But my point is, you can't necessarily say that CEOs aren't reinvesting into their companies. That's my only point. But
how can you? Wait a minute. You think buying stock or selling stock is an investment? It's not.
Well, stock options as part of a package.
Stock option, when people buy or sell, when people buy or sell stocks, it has absolutely no impact on the company whatsoever. It's only when an IPO is issued that you're actually giving money to a company. When you're exercising a stock option, you're not giving money to a company. You're giving money to Carl Icahn or whoever happened to be the guy who held that stock before you did.
Let's go back to your argument though. Are you saying that you want Tim Cook to? I'm not sure what his salary is. Do you want him to? He's got hundreds of billions of dollars a company, right? So you want him to cut his salary, which is in the range of tens of millions, and reinvest back into the company. Is that the
Tim Cook's predecessor made $1.
Right.
Steve Jobs is only taking $1
for 1 year.
That's happening quite a bit with a lot of Fortune 100 CEOs anyway. So I guess I don't understand kind of the argument, but I do want to get back to your graph. The trouble I have with it, you're trying to say that there's a direct causal link between tax rates and GDP growth.
Say that.
How? That's the myth.
I just told you
myth I don't understand.
I'll give you,
because CEOs reinvest in R&D as if R&D is not a line item on corporate income statements.
It is.
That's what I'm saying, but you're saying it doesn't happen because we're pulling all this money out of R&D and paying CEOs, fat cat CEOs.
We are.
Where's the data that proves that?
It's A, look at the history. B, common sense. I mean, it's just if you are running a business and you're Stephen J. Hemsley and you're running United Healthcare, okay? And I use him as an example because he's a guy who has taken $800 million in compensation from United Healthcare. You can do one of two things. You can say, hey, we're a health insurance company. Let's take $700 million of that and use it to vaccinate kids and do liver transplants and save people's lives. Or let's take $700 million of that and give it to Stephen J. Hemsley, and he can buy 5 new houses.
I understand what you're saying.
And with Reaganomics, he's bought the 5 new houses.
I understand what you're saying. You're looking at the tax code as a punitive.
I'm saying that taxes, there are 2 reasons for taxes. One is to raise revenue, but that's the least important. The first is to alter behavior. You modify behavior for the good of society and for the economy.
You're talking about basic human behavior.
That's social engineering.
Of course it is.
If somebody's trying to come after 90% of your income, you're going to try a lot harder to get out of that. And then if somebody's coming after 25% of your income, that's just a fact.
But it's only
because
your
you're willing
income.
to pay the 70. You're
The
willing to pay the
90% tax
65%.
rate doesn't even kick in until after you've made $3 or $4 million.
And I'm telling you, nobody paid those
secret.
high rates. It just didn't happen. And I got another issue with that graph, too, is you're saying essentially that since tax rates did this, GDP growth declined as well. But you know what's gone up at that time? The number of federal regulations and the number of pages in the tax code. And that has a precipitous effect on depressing economic growth.
Federal regulations actually generally have the opposite effect that you're describing. They generally increase economic growth.
How?
Well, for example, if you say to the Koch brothers, you've got this refinery out there and it's belching all this poison into the air and killing people downwind with cancer, you're going to have to put a scrubber on that. Somebody's got to design that scrubber. That's a job. Somebody's got to build that scrubber. That's a job. This is not zero sum.
These are growth investments. You have to have investments
somebody
that
has to
generate
develop
wealth.
technology.
No, if you make the process of producing a product more expensive, you're not generating wealth. That is basic economics 101.
Building scrubbers is generating wealth.
Right, but if I mandate that you have to have crutches and you
don't
need them, that doesn't grow the economy.
Right, okay, but you know what does actually grow to the economy? When CEOs are not so self-interested as to not understand that
CEOs
this
don't
is
determine
how
their own pay.
This
the board
is how.
does.
Fine. The point is that when corporations do not understand that if they're trying to avoid corporate taxes, that's actually the money that we use as a company. As a country. To in fact pay for our infrastructure. So if you want good schools and roads and fire departments and things like that,
you can pay for all of that stuff on a line item that is categorized as other and federal revenue. All of that stuff, NASA, roads, all of that categorized as other.
At the current rate of spending, we're $2.5 trillion in the hole with regard to infrastructure.
70% of the federal budget is wealth transfer programs that you guys love and interest on the debt that we need to finance those programs.
That's not true. Actually, because Social Security is not part of the general budget of the United States. That's where you're getting your money from. If you want to talk 70%, start talking about the military.
Another quick point on this.
54%.
Whenever you're talking about punitive taxes, what usually happens, because you just mentioned, I think, Apple that doesn't pay corporate taxes. What usually happens is it's the middle-sized and small-sized businesses or income earners that get hit with these punitive tax rates as you're talking about. And then it's the rich fat cats that find loopholes because they have the armies and the lawyers and the accountants that can help dodge those tax rates.
Then why were they not successful in doing that from 1935
they
to
were.
1986?
That's what we're telling you. They put all their money in municipal bonds. You can't get that stuff.
They were
That's
not.
tax-free.
They were making 30 times what their workers were making, and their workers were making more every year. And ever since the Reagan Revolution, workers have been making less and less. Right now, $5,000 a year less than they were making when Reagan came into office.
You're not talking about the same worker. You're not talking about the same people. You're talking about average income. And if you have a growing labor market and you have more people entering the labor force, women, immigrants, then yes, the average pay is going to come down. But if you're talking about Joe Bob, who entered the workforce in 1970, his average income has gone up. If
No,
you're
it has
talking
not.
about
It
a
has
single
gone
person,
down because the unions have been destroyed by Republican policy.
If you're talking about a single person, average incomes go up. If you're talking about static people, but you're talking about a snapshot
Patrick,
of the
if you want to talk about
population
individuals,
from 1970 to
the numbers I've been
2015.
using are household numbers, right? The household numbers are.
Well, it's still household averages looking at percentages instead of a specific family.
If you look at household numbers from pre-Reagan to today, there's about a $5,000 decline in household income.
But those households have changed.
If you look at individual income from pre-Reagan to today, it's almost cut in half.
But you're not talking about the same people.
Right, because now it takes two people working to produce the same household income that one person could do before Reaganomics.
But the households have shifted. We have different see, my household that I was in 1990 has split in two. I'm now living on my own, and my parents have a separate household. So if you have more households, and these are different people, you're looking at static categories of people moving in and out of those categories. This is simple economics. It really is. And so you're trying to put this perception of a broader problem that we frankly don't have. If you add a lot of people in, if we have 5 people that are making $100,000 and we add in 5 people that are making $10,000, then yes, the average income is going to fall from $100,000, but the economy is still richer.
We're talking about the growth of GDP. And what happens is that when the top tax rate, after you've made your $3 million a year, after that, you're going to just have to be happy with that $3 million a year, leave the rest of it in the company. When that happens, GDP grows at more than 4%.
You're decoupling GDP growth from economic regulation and tax code complexity, which I think is insane.
And there's no causal link to say that happens.
Sure there is.
Again, you're saying that we're punishing people because they're
the only 4 decades in the history of the United States when we had GDP growth that exceeded 3.5%. 4 decades in a row were the 4 decades when the top tax rate was 90%.
And Europe was in ruins, and Asia was in ruins.
Exactly.
The global economy there was nowhere else to do business.
Excuse me, in the 1950s, external trade was less than 3% of our GDP.
Right, who are you going to trade with? Everybody's house has been burned down in the war.
So you're making my point. It had nothing to do with the war. We were selling to ourselves. Patrick Hedger, Christy Setzer, Huey Newsom, it's great to have you all with us. Thank you.